Hi everybody, welcome back to tnoozLIVE at the Aviation Festival, presented by JetBlue Technology Ventures and sponsored by Travel Air. My name is Martin Cowan, I'm Editorial Director for tNews. Thanks for making the time to join us. Next up on the sofa, I've got John Rodgerson, who's the CEO of Azul, which is an airline based in Brazil. It's pretty big, bigger than I thought when I looked into it. So John, maybe just give us an idea about just how big Azul is in Brazil, and I think you do international as well. So just give us a brief.
It's amazing. The airline, hasn't even. We'll have our 10th year on December 15th is our 10-year anniversary, and we now have over 800 flights a day. We have more flights than any other airline in Brazil. We serve 100 destinations domestically in Brazil. Our next closest competitor is about half that. We do have flights to the United States, to Fort Lauderdale, Orlando. Also into Europe, to Lisbon, but it's a pretty big airline. We've got 10 million members in our loyalty program, which is booming. We've got almost 12,000 crew members at the airline and about 130 aircraft, and we've got plans to continue to grow the airline and double it over the next 5 years. And so we've significantly invested in Brazil, and so we're pretty excited about the prospects.
Okay, I mean that's doubling of the fleet in 5 years when you're only 10 years old and you've got 130 planes altogether is quite an ambitious growth.
Doubling the number of passengers, not necessarily the number of fleets.
Okay.
So we're doing a lot of upgauging.
Okay, cool. So before we get into the sort of the specifics of the airline, just give us an idea about Brazil as a sort of online digital market. I mean,
it's really interesting because Brazil is. Social media penetration in Brazil is huge, and so you talk about Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. It's very, very big, but still, from a online ticket agency standpoint, it's very low penetration today. There's a lot of consolidators, and it's very difficult for the OTAs to really make a big penetration in Brazil. There's still a lot of brick and mortar travel agencies in Brazil, which I thought would go down over time, and we really haven't seen that over the last few years.
Okay, I mean I was going to ask you to sort of describe your distribution strategy, so maybe sort of just carry on with what you were saying there.
Yes, so I think about 30% of our tickets are sold via our site directly, and then the remaining 70% is through corporate travel agencies that book through a portal onto our site, but it's kind of an indirect channel, if you will, and so it's still not nearly what it is in Europe or in the United States. And so I think there's a long way to go in Brazil to get that to the levels you see elsewhere in the world.
And is that just a sort of consumer perception?
I think it's consumer perception. I think it's a confidence thing. I think over time, people believe that they get better pricing going through a travel agent. But I think over time that'll certainly change, and that's something that we have to help the consumer understand as well. That it's much better to come direct to us. And there's benefits of coming to our direct channels. Okay,
so I mean, you mentioned there the penetration of Facebook and Twitter and social media in Brazil. I mean, how does that feed into your marketing at all? I mean,
absolutely. I mean, we spend very little on marketing, and I think our greatest marketing is our customers. And so when we have customers that love to fly on us, we leave our social media channels open, and so when people travel, they can post whatever they want, and we respond to them, and we have a great interaction with our customers. I like to say, we focus way more on NPS, than we do on margin, because if if our customers feel great about us, the margin is going to take care of itself, and that's allowed us to be the most profitable airline in Brazil, and it's really focusing on making sure our customers love to fly Azul. They're proud to be part of the airline. We're the only airline in Brazil that flies the Brazilian-made aircraft. That means a big deal to people in Brazil.
So that's the Embraer.
That's the Embraer aircraft,
okay,
absolutely.
Cool, okay. You mentioned in the introduction the loyalty scheme with sort of 10 million members. I mean, that's quite a significant number by any standards, 10 million members of a loyalty scheme. So how do you leverage that as a sort of brand positioning vehicle, or is it a hardcore revenue generating, or what's the strategy around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge revenue generator for us, and I think as you take a look at Brazil is really the only market where they've had two of our competitors have spun off their loyalty businesses into separately publicly traded companies. And so, they're cash flow generative and very, very important. In Brazil, it's slightly different because the banks, it's not one bank, one airline. There's several banks that buy points from all the different airlines, for people that are using credit cards. And so having a big loyalty program drives a lot of margin expansion for the airlines overall. And so I think we'll continue to dedicate to it. We have our own separate management team that runs our loyalty business, and just a couple of years ago we only had 5 million members, and it continues to grow leaps and bounds. And just to give you an idea of the scale of the airline, this year we'll carry about 25 million customers this year. And prior to Azul launching, there was only 47 million total travelers in Brazil in 2007, and just Azul alone. I think that that's the big, big thing about our business model that I love to talk about, is that we've grown the pie in Brazil. There's a lot more people traveling today in Brazil than have ever traveled before, and we didn't have to steal customers from our competitors. We actually created our own market. There's several cities that we're the only airline that flies to, and we went in there and have connected cities that previously weren't connected. You think about it, the US carriers and European carriers need regional aircraft to feed their main hubs. Nobody was doing that in Brazil. So they were flying the same aircraft, Rio, Sao Paulo, and then trying to do it in cities with 100,000, 200,000 people. And so that kind of limited the growth of aviation in Brazil. And what's really had exploding growth in Brazil is that we've gone in there and we've opened up all new markets. And so now we're flying to many different destinations. As I said earlier, it's 100 destinations in the country, and we believe there's room for another 35 just in the next 3 years. And so we'll intend to grow to 135 destinations just in the next 3 years. And so I think that's really, really important for us to continue to grow the pie in Brazil. Brazilians still travel less than Argentines, than Chileans, than Colombians, than Mexicans. There's no reason for that. Brazilians should be traveling a lot more than they do today.
Okay, so I'm just trying to think, was the chicken and the egg? Did you see that there were a lot of unserved destinations in Brazil and build the business around that, or was it? I'm trying to think, was it the other way around? Was it the?
Yeah, when we looked at it, when we decided we were working on the business plan in late 2007 and early 2008, we looked and we said, wait a second, why is the market stagnant? Why are there only 47 million people traveling? And the reason is that nobody was taking advantage of the smaller aircraft type. And so, our initial order to start the airline was fly Embraer aircraft around, and everybody thought we were absolutely crazy because we were flying Embraer aircraft. And then we said, wait a second, the turboprop in this market works really well as well, because there's a lot of markets that you can't be served even with jets. And so finally 2 years ago we got the Airbus, and so the Airbus is being fed by the ATRs, by the E-jets, and a lot of people said, well, wait a second, Azul, what's going to happen now that you've upgauged so significantly to the A320s? And believe it or not, our load factors have only gone up, because there's so many more connectivity options that we have. And so, yeah, we are replacing some of our E-jets with some A320neos, but that's just because we've grown out of the E-jets in a lot of the markets and a lot of our trunk routes that we fly. Okay,
so in terms of the domestic network, is it business travel, is it leisure, VFRs, or is it feeder?
Absolutely business. It's about 65-70% is business travelers. Very different than you'd see in Europe or the United States. And so, when you talk about that, frequency matters. And so, not only do we fly to 100 cities in the country, we serve 100 cities. And so having a smaller gauged aircraft where you can go in and out, several times a day in markets really, really matters, because the business traveler wants to be able to get up in the morning, go do business, and be back at home at night. And I think that that's the advantage that our network provides. And so it's a big, big difference. If you overlay what our competitors are doing, they exactly have the same business model. One flies Airbus, one flies Boeing, none of them have regional jets. And if you take a look at what we do, we're the only one that actually has the right aircraft for every given market that we fly to. And that's allowed us to continue to grow this market.
So with sort of 60-70% of your sort of domestic business travel, what's your relationship with the travel management companies?
It's very good. I think that the consolidators and the travel agencies are a big partner of ours, and so I think that that's a big source of our revenue, and so we take very, very good care of them. But as I look at the next, call it the next 5 years, what needs to happen is the leisure traveler needs to grow in Brazil. And the reason why the leisure travel hasn't grown in Brazil is because fares are high, because fuel is very high, And and so you'll see that in Brazil, fuel's 50% more expensive than it is anywhere else in the world. And so where you see U.S. carriers that are perhaps not taking next generation aircraft, it's imperative that Brazilian carriers take next generation aircraft. And so that's why the Neo is so important to us. That's why the Embraer E2 is so important to us. That's why the turboprop works so well, because it burns such a little amount of fuel. And so that's going to allow us to be able to take fares down and to grow the leisure market as well. Because the business traveler will always travel. And obviously there's recessions and stuff that we pass through in Brazil, but the business traveler has to travel and can pay the higher fares. But we need to make sure that we take our costs down so that we can grow the market overall.
I mean, that's a nice way to round it off, isn't it? That you've got a fairly strong, hardcore business travel business, and the growth will come through the leisure, but you have to reduce the costs.
Absolutely.
To bring the leisure in, and then you can raise prices. Okay, well look, John, thanks very much. I just love talking about Brazil. I think it's
well, you have to come visit us. I know you've been down there a few years ago, but come back.
I will do, all right.
A lot's changed.
John Rodgerson, CEO of Azul, thanks very much for joining us. Martin Cowan, Editorial Director. This is tnoozLIVE at the Aviation Festival, presented by JetBlue Technology Ventures and sponsored by Travelair. We'll be back shortly. Thank you very much.